By the time Silas Redd saw the hand rise out of the snow, the mountain road had already stopped feeling real. Wind drove sideways across his truck in white sheets so thick they erased the pines, the ditch, and the world beyond. Cody, the Belgian Malinois in the passenger seat, had not blinked in 10 minutes. The dog's ears were pinned forward, eyes fixed on something beyond the storm. Silas had come to Black Hollow County to bury old ghosts in an inherited farmhouse no one wanted. Instead, the mountain gave him a sheriff dying in an overturned SUV, a rescue no sane man could ignore, and a dog that kept staring toward a house Silas had not yet reached, as if Cody already knew whatever waited inside Black Hollow Farm had been waiting for them. What time are you watching? Please like, share, and subscribe to K9 and Seal Stories. And now the story begins. Silas had left Denver before dawn with a notarized envelope in the glove compartment and a sentence from a dead man lodged like bone beneath his ribs. Jonah Redd had not been his father, not exactly his uncle in the clean Sunday sense either, but he had been the only adult in Silas's life who never asked him to pretend fear was shame. Jonah had taught him how to read land, weather, and silence. Years later, after teams, deployments, loss, and the kind of buried violence that kept waking him at 2:17 every morning, Silas got the call that Jonah had died in northern Wyoming and had named him sole heir to a farm outside a place called Alder's Run. The attorney had expected a polite refusal. Instead, Silas loaded the truck, leashed Cody, and drove west into weather that looked personal. He had told himself the drive west was practical. The teams were over. The calls had stopped. Friends who once understood his silences had scattered. But the truth was uglier and simpler. Denver had become too full of familiar corners, and every corner eventually bent toward memory. Jonah's letter offered what therapy, routine, and exhaustion had not: a direction. Not healing, exactly. Just motion with purpose. Cody seemed to sense that difference. The dog had watched Silas load the truck without fuss, then taken position in the cab, like a partner accepting orders for one more mission no one else wanted. The interstate gave way to state road, then to a county lane that climbed into timbered mountains where the sky pressed low and gray like a lid. He kept the radio off. He did not want company from voices. The only sound in the cab was Cody's breathing and the soft rattle of chains in the bed. The Malinois was 4 years old, all coiled muscle and absolute attention, a dog Silas had adopted through a veteran's working dog transition program after leaving the teams. Cody did not do pet. Cody watched doors, windows, tree lines, and human hands. Cody also knew every variation of Silas's silence and could distinguish grief from anger without being told. Around mile marker 12, the road narrowed to 2 black tracks between walls of wind-driven snow. The county plow had turned back hours earlier. Silas considered doing the same, but the memory of Jonah's handwriting in the letter kept him moving. If you're reading this, I ran out of time. Go to the farm. Don't trust anyone who arrives already smiling. Jonah had always liked a dramatic sentence, but even in memory it unsettled him. Cody rose suddenly from the seat and braced both front paws against the dashboard. His ears sharpened. His body leaned right. Silas slowed. "What is it?" Cody whined once, low and urgent, then snapped his head toward the ravine side of the road. 100 yards later, Silas saw why. Broken guardrail, fresh gouge marks, a dark shape below the drop. He slammed the brakes, got out into wind that hit like fists, and fought his way to the edge. 20 feet down, half-canted against scrub pine and ice, was a county SUV on its side. Its headlights glowed under snow like tired eyes. Cody was already pulling toward the embankment. Silas clipped a line to the dog's harness point and another to his own belt. He tested the slope with one boot, then descended in short, controlled steps. Glass broke under his knee when he reached the vehicle. The driver's side was crushed. The passenger side window was shattered inward. Inside, a heavy-set man in a sheriff's winter jacket hung twisted against the seatbelt, blood crusted dark at the temple, lips turning blue. "Sheriff," Silas said, though the man might not hear him. "Stay with me." No response. Cody barked once and shoved his muzzle through the broken opening, sniffing the man's face, then the dashboard, then the rear compartment. Not searching for explosives now, just confirming life. The dog turned back and stared hard at Silas. Alive. Barely. Silas cut the seatbelt, braced the sheriff's neck, and eased the man down without letting his skull snap against the doorframe. He checked airway, pulse, pupils, weak pulse, concussion likely, possible rib damage, severe exposure if they stayed. The radio handset was crushed. The engine ticked weakly. The slope groaned under shifting snowpack. "We move now," Silas told the dog. He wrapped the sheriff in a thermal blanket from the emergency kit, secured a drag strap, and started the miserable haul upward. Twice his boots slid. Once the sheriff coughed and almost rolled from the improvised sled. Cody ran ahead, then back, then ahead again, scouting the line like he understood the geometry of survival. When they reached the road, Silas got the man into the truck cab, cranked the heat, and pressed gauze to the wound above the eye. After a minute, the sheriff's eyelids fluttered. "You're okay," Silas lied. "You rolled your vehicle." The man stared, disoriented, then focused slowly on the uniformed discipline in Silas's posture, then on Cody's unblinking face. "Who?" "Name's Silas Redd." "Dog?" "Cody." The sheriff's mouth trembled toward a grin. Didn't think Black Hollow sent angels." "It didn't," Silas said. "It sent a truck with decent tires." The sheriff gave a pained laugh that turned into a cough. "Dean Holloway," he managed. "Sheriff, you headed where?" Silas hesitated. "Black Hollow Farm." That changed something. Even dazed, Holloway's expression tightened. Not fear exactly. Recognition with old weariness folded inside it. "Jonah's place," he said. "Should have known." "You knew him?" Everybody knew Jonah. Not everybody liked what Jonah knew. Before Silas could ask more, Cody left the cab, jumped down, and stood rigid in the road facing uphill into white static. The dog was not looking at the crash. The dog was looking farther up the mountain, past the storm, past whatever the human eye could strip from the blur. Silas followed the line of Cody's gaze and felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck for no reason he could name. The road ahead bent through pines toward the ridge where the farm sat. He could not see it. He could only feel the strange certainty that the dog had fixed on something waiting there. "We need to get you somewhere warm," Silas said. Holloway swallowed and closed his eyes, once against pain. "My office is back in town. Too far." Another cough. "Farm's closer. Get there. Then call Doc Weller from the landline if the power's out." Why would the farm still have a landline? Because Jonah didn't trust towers. Holloway grimaced and pressed a hand to his side. "Listen to me. Don't leave the main road if the drifts get bad. There's a cedar split at the old fence. Follow the fence posts after that." "And the farm?" "If the dog won't settle," Holloway whispered. Pay attention. The drive from the wreck to Black Hollow Farm took 20 more minutes and felt longer than a deployment flight over dead water. The truck crawled around switchbacks while the storm thickened. Twice Silas lost the road entirely and drove by memory of the fence line emerging and disappearing under snow. Holloway drifted in and out. Cody remained standing the whole time, nose near the side window, body tense but perfectly controlled. At the cedar split, Silas turned through a sagging gate and followed buried fence posts across a field he could barely see. Then, through the storm, the farmhouse appeared, a broad two-story structure of dark timber and stone crouched against the mountain, like something built not just to endure winter, but to keep things in. One upstairs window glowed faintly amber on backup power. Snow had banked along the porch. The barn behind it leaned like a shoulder against the wind. Cody's reaction was immediate. The dog did not wag, did not whine, did not sniff the general air in the curious way of arrival. Cody went still. Every line of him narrowed toward the house. Holloway opened his eyes just long enough to see the dog looking. Yeah, he whispered. That's about right. Silas got the sheriff inside through the side mudroom, found blankets, a medical cabinet, and a generator humming somewhere beneath the floor. The house smelled of cedar, dust, old iron, and the faint medicinal trace of a man who had lived alone for too long. While Silas checked Holloway's ribs and improvised a temporary wrap, Cody moved through the kitchen, then the hall, then back again, not restless but deliberate. Mapping, measuring, listening. When Silas finally straightened from the sheriff's chairside, the dog was standing beside a built-in bench beneath the front window, nose pressed to the wood, as if the grain itself had spoken. Cody, Silas said quietly. The dog did not turn. Outside, beyond the frosted pane, somewhere past the buried fence and black timber, another engine started, idled for 3 slow seconds, and went silent. Morning did not so much arrive as thin out the dark. The storm broke in fragments of gray light, revealing the farm in hard edges. Split-rail fencing hunched under snow, a collapsed equipment shed, a barn with one sliding door half off track, and beyond all of it, a rising timberline that climbed into granite. Black Hollow Farm sat alone on its ridge with the kind of isolation that made a man aware of every unseen approach. Holloway's fever had eased by dawn. He could sit upright, though it cost him. Silas made coffee from grounds Jonah had apparently stored by the pound and let the sheriff study him over the rim of a chipped mug. "You've got Jonah's eyes," Holloway said. "No," Silas answered. "Just his bad luck." Holloway gave a tired laugh. "That too." Cody remained near the front room bench, leaving it only when Silas moved into another part of the house. Each time he returned, the dog went back to the same general area and tested the air around the wall, the underside of the bench, and the floorboards in a widening triangle. Holloway noticed. "Jonah ever tell you about the hidden things in that house?" "No." "He told everybody there were no hidden things in that house. That usually means the opposite." Silas asked what Jonah had done before retiring to the farm. Holloway stared into the coffee for a moment. "Surveyor, part-time county contractor, full-time stubborn man. Knew where every line lay in this county and who had shifted one when nobody was looking." The words settled heavily. After breakfast, Holloway insisted on leaving despite Silas's objections. He radioed one of his deputies from the truck once they found a spot near the barn with intermittent signal, then sat in the passenger seat, breathing carefully, while Silas drove him into Alder's Run. The town was little more than one main street, A clinic, a hardware store, a diner with frost on the windows, 2 churches, and the sheriff's office facing a memorial flagpole. Yet beneath its neat winter silence was a tension Silas recognized from places where everybody knew exactly how much truth could ruin them. People stared when he parked, not rudely, carefully. The way residents study a stranger who has unknowingly opened the wrong door. Alder's Run was the kind of town that had learned to make caution look like courtesy. People held doors, nodded, offered directions, and still managed to communicate that every stranger arrived with the potential to disturb an old agreement. Silas had seen villages overseas behave the same way after militias left, outwardly functional, inwardly sorted by what could be admitted in public and what had to survive in lowered voices. Even the church signs seemed careful. One advertised grace, the other advertised endurance. Both felt less like invitations than coded local instructions. Cody caught the tension too. The dog never lunged, never barked, never acted threatened. He simply watched each doorway, each hand in a pocket, each pause in conversation, and moved closer whenever somebody mentioned Jonah or the farm. By the time Silas drove back up the mountain, he was no longer wondering whether the county held a secret. He was wondering how many people had already built their lives around not naming it. Deputy Matt Kersey met them outside, helped Holloway in, and shot a long look at Cody. "That the dog that found you?" Holloway nodded. "Dog found me. Man dragged me." Kersey turned to Silas with gratitude and suspicion mixed in equal parts. "Appreciate it." "You're welcome." "You staying long?" Holloway answered before Silas could. "At the farm." Kersey's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "Right." Later at the clinic, Doc Weller taped Holloway's ribs, confirmed the concussion, and muttered that a week's rest might save the sheriff from himself. When Silas returned to the street, Cody paused outside the county records office and stared at the door. Silas followed the dog's gaze to a brass plaque tarnished green with age, County Recorder and Land Services. Strange, but not stranger than the rest. He bought supplies at the hardware store, where the owner, an elderly woman named June Bell, recognized Jonah's name and said, he always expected winter and people to betray him. Usually he was right about one of those. At the diner he ate a late lunch while Cody lay under the booth, alert to every movement. 2 men at the counter went quiet when he mentioned the farm. A woman in a knit cap pretended not to listen and failed. By the time he stood to leave, Silas had learned almost nothing directly and plenty indirectly. Jonah had been respected but not embraced. The farm had been offered for sale twice and somehow never listed. Several parcels on the northern ridge had changed hands in recent years without anyone being able to explain to whom. And Victor Hale, whose name surfaced only once in a lowered voice, was the sort of man locals mentioned the way people mention weather fronts they do not believe can be stopped. On the drive back, Holloway's earlier remark returned to him. Not everybody liked what Jonah knew. Snowlight flattened the world into silver when he reached the farm. Cody bounded from the truck, then stopped dead at the porch, nose high. Silas scanned the field. Fresh tire marks. Faint, but there. A vehicle had come up the lane after they left and turned around before the drift line near the barn. No footprints to the porch, no obvious tampering. Just presence. Deliberate and easily denied. Inside, the house held its warmth and its silence. Silas unpacked the supplies, checked windows, and made a slow sweep of every room. Jonah's belongings remained almost absurdly intact. Coats on pegs, work boots by the back door, legal pads filled with tiny, neat script, field maps rolled into a trunk, and in the upstairs office a locked metal file cabinet bolted to the floor. The key was missing. The farmhouse deepened that feeling. Nothing in it appeared random. Jonah had lived like a man expecting weather, betrayal, and inspection. Every boot by the door, every folded blanket, every labeled drawer suggested not eccentricity, but preparation. Even before the hidden latch opened, Silas began to suspect the house had been quietly arranged as testimony. Cody led him back down the stairs, through the front room, and once more to the bench beneath the window. This time the dog scratched once at the floorboard to the left of it, then looked at Silas with the impatient certainty of a teammate who has already given the signal twice. Silas knelt. The bench was built into the wall, older than the rest of the trim, with a seam hidden beneath layers of stain. The floorboard beside it rang differently when tapped. Hollow. He fetched a flashlight, pry bar, and small screwdriver from Jonah's workroom. The first false lead was the bench lid, which opened only to reveal blankets and 2 oil lamps. The second was a warped baseboard that concealed nothing but mouse-chewed insulation. Cody did not lose interest. The dog shifted to the wall panel behind the bench and pressed his nose to a knot in the woodwork where no knot should have been. Silas touched it. It rotated inward with a soft click. Somewhere inside the wall, metal released. He stepped back and stared. An entire vertical trim panel loosened by a fraction of an inch. Hidden latch, Jonah. You paranoid old genius, he thought. He was reaching for the panel when the power flickered, dipped, then returned. Cody spun toward the window and growled, not wildly, but with a depth that announced a human threat. Silas killed the lamp, moved to the edge of the glass, and looked through a gap in the frost. At the far tree line just visible between the pines, a dark SUV sat facing the house with its lights off. Too far to identify make or plate. Close enough to let him know the house was under observation. The engine turned over. The vehicle backed away and vanished behind the timber. Silas stood still for several seconds, letting the old mission part of his mind wake fully. Angles, distance, route to cover, weak points, line of retreat. The familiar calm slid over him, and he hated how much of it felt like home. He drew the curtain, checked every exterior door, and returned to the panel. "All right," he said softly to Cody. "We do this now." The hidden panel opened onto a narrow cavity between walls, deeper than expected, with iron brackets set like ladder rungs. Air breathed up from below, cool and dry. A concealed space was one thing. A concealed descent was another. Cody waited at his shoulder, eyes bright, body pointed down into the dark, as if the dog had been trying all day to say the same thing in the only language he owned. There. That is where the truth is. The stair shaft behind the wall dropped into darkness that smelled of cold stone, old paper, and machine oil. Silas took one flashlight for himself and clipped a smaller lamp to Cody's working collar, more for tracking the dog's position than illumination. The rungs ended after 10 feet at a compact underground room carved partly into bedrock beneath the front room. It was dry, insulated, and cleaner than any forgotten space had a right to be. Jonah had not merely hidden this room, he had maintained it. Shelving lined 2 walls. A large map table sat in the center beneath a green-shaded lamp wired to a separate battery bank. Metal file drawers filled the far corner, On the wall above them hung county plats, survey overlays, easement diagrams, and property transfer charts pinned with colored string like a war room for a man fighting paperwork instead of bullets. Cody paced once around the room, sniffed the base of the file cabinets, then settled beside the table as though satisfied he had brought Silas to the correct kill box. Silas laid the flashlight down and began to read. At first glance, the material looked like any obsessive land survey archive. Parcel numbers, subdivision plans, mineral access routes, old deeds copied from county books. But the deeper he went, the wrongness emerged. Multiple parcels transferred within months to limited liability companies registered in Nevada, Delaware, and Montana. The mailing addresses looped back to empty lots, abandoned storefronts, or registered agents linked to a single corporate umbrella. Hale Resource Holdings. Names repeated across signatures with minor spelling shifts, as if someone had created human identities the way one builds scaffolding. Temporary, useful, disposable. Jonah had annotated everything in hard pencil. Notary dead before signature date. Witness address belongs to cemetery parcel. Boundary moved 46 feet east after flood year. Original owner never notified. Silas's pulse slowed into that dangerous clarity he knew from raids, the moment when chaos stopped being emotional and became structural. On the table lay a sealed envelope addressed to him in Jonah's careful hand. He broke the seal. The letter inside was dated 14 months earlier. Silas, if you are here, either I finally won an argument with mortality or I lost badly. Read this before you decide I've become senile. Someone has been stealing this county one signature at a time. Not land in the abstract. Homes, timber, water rights, access roads, graves, if they can get away with it. I found the pattern because they forgot surveyors know where the bones are buried and where the fence used to stand before men with money renamed the hill. If this room is open, then they know I know. If they know, I may already be dead or too close to it to trust the sheriff, the recorder, or any smiling man in polished boots. There is one exception. Dean Holloway is decent, but decency is not armor. Trust your dog. He sees before men admit what they are seeing. Silas stopped there, jaw tight. Jonah had always been dramatic, but this was not performance. This was a man recording the shape of his fear in case somebody else had to wear it later. The room also explained Jonah in a way ordinary memory never had. Silas had loved him in the practical, guarded way veterans love men who teach more by example than comfort, but he had never fully understood how lonely Jonah's final years must have been. This bunker was not the hobby of a harmless eccentric. It was the working office of a man who had realized institutions were failing one by one and had decided that if truth was going to survive in Black Hollow, he would have to become its last archive, clerk, witness, and sentry all by himself. What struck Silas most was the discipline of it. The labels were clean, the dates were cross-checked, the duplicates were bundled in fire-safe sleeves. Even the string lines on the wall obeyed a logic another surveyor could follow under pressure. Jonah had not prepared this room merely to satisfy his fear. He had prepared it for discovery, for transfer, for the possibility that another set of hands, arriving late and angry and skeptical, would need to understand the whole map quickly enough to survive what came next. That thought changed grief into obligation, and obligation into something close to resolve. He kept reading. The key evidence sits in 3 places. Here, the barn, and the county ledger book. No one thinks matters anymore. Hail will come if you disturb the order of things. He likes to arrive as if he is offering peace. Do not let him define what peace costs. Cody's head rose sharply at the last name, as though the dog had heard it spoken before. Silas folded the letter and opened the first drawer. Original deeds. Fraudulent duplicates. Quiet settlement offers. Maps marking parcels along the northern ridge, all converging around a proposed industrial water corridor no public document had announced. Another folder contained photographs of elderly residents, cabins, trailer plots, and grazing land. Families who likely had no idea their property had been transferred out from under them by layers of shell entities and forged notices. In the bottom drawer, he found something stranger. Jonah's log of deaths. Not dramatic enough to make headlines. A rancher who crashed his truck on an icy grade after refusing an easement buyout. A widow who died of smoke inhalation in a faulty cabin fire 3 weeks after challenging a boundary survey. A retired clerk who suffered a stroke on the courthouse steps after reportedly telling people a ledger had gone missing. Coincidence until it isn't. Pattern once the bodies can no longer argue. Cody left the table and moved to a low cabinet near the back wall. He sniffed hard, pawed once, and looked up. Inside was a cassette recorder, several labeled tapes, and an old revolver wrapped in oiled cloth. Silas ignored the gun and played the tape marked, "For Dean, if I vanish." Jonah's voice crackled into the room, older and rougher than memory. "Dean, if you're hearing this, then the county lost a decent sheriff before it admitted it still had one. Hale's not the whole thing. He's the face. There's somebody in records, maybe somebody in the assessor's chain too. I couldn't prove the judge, but I'd bet my better boots he's seen paperwork he never should have accepted." The tape clicked, resumed. "If Silas comes, don't try to protect him by lying. The boys lived through men shooting back. He won't survive a quiet town smiling him to death." Silas stared at the spinning reels until the tape stopped. Above him the house creaked. Wind. Maybe. Or settling. He suddenly wanted out of the underground room, not from fear of the dark, but because now he understood what the room meant. Jonah had built a private evidence bunker because the public institutions meant to hold truth had become part of the threat. He photographed everything on his phone and copied the most critical pages into a field notebook in case electronics vanished. Then he chose a handful of files to move upstairs. Cody led him back to the ladder. At the top, the house felt different, as if knowledge altered architecture. Every window was now a vulnerability. Every approach line mattered. Silas secured the panel again, then went out to inspect the barn because Jonah's letter had named it as the second site. The wind had dropped. Snow glittered under a hard blue late-afternoon sky. The barn door resisted, then gave with a groan. Inside, feed bins, rusted tack, a workbench, and in the rear bay, stacked survey stakes beside an old snowmobile. Under the bench, he found a weatherproof tube containing aerial photos and one more envelope. This note was shorter. "If they burn the house, the barn keeps speaking." Beneath it lay copies of parcel overlays showing a proposed route for a water extraction line crossing private land through easements created after owners had supposedly abandoned property that they still occupied. Corporate theft dressed as legal inevitability. On the way back to the house, Cody froze by the fence. Nose up, ears knife-sharp. Silas followed the dog's line and saw a man standing at the end of the lane beside a black SUV, hands in the pockets of a camel overcoat, posture easy, as if he had come to discuss landscaping rather than trespass. Even at a distance, the elegance read wrong against the raw country. The man lifted one gloved hand in greeting. Silas did not wave back. Cody's growl deepened. The man smiled slightly, turned, got into the SUV, and drove away without ever attempting the porch. Not a threat delivered in words, a threat delivered by confidence. Silas knew then that the hidden room was no longer Jonah's secret. It was now a clock, and someone had just let him hear it start. Silas spent that night moving like a man preparing for weather and contact. He set motion chimes on the porch doors, using old tackle bells from Jonah's shed. He parked the truck nose out for a fast departure. He hid copied documents in 3 locations, one in the root cellar, one inside the wall cavity, and one sealed in a grain bin in the barn. He kept the originals below until he could decide whom to trust. Cody shadowed him without fatigue, resting only when Silas sat. At 4:12 a.m., the bells at the side mudroom chimed once. Not enough to mean entry, enough to mean touch. Silas killed the lamp, took position beside the hall corner, and waited. Snow hissed lightly against the siding. Nothing. Cody stood silent, head low, eyes on the door. After 5 minutes, Silas opened it fast and swept the porch. No one there. On the step sat a cream-colored envelope weighted by a polished riverstone. Inside was a business card embossed simply, Victor Hale, Hale Resource Holdings. On the back, handwritten in dark blue ink, Black Hollow can be generous to newcomers. It is unwise to confuse inheritance with belonging. Silas burned the card in the sink. In town the next day, he went first to Holloway, who looked worse and angrier. "He came out there himself?" the sheriff said. "Or close enough for me to see him?" Holloway leaned back painfully. "That means you're past rumor. You told Jonah you were decent. He said decency isn't armor." The sheriff barked a laugh despite himself. "Sounds like him." When Silas showed him copies of the deeds and Jonah's annotations, Holloway's face darkened in stages. Recognition, confirmation, shame. "I knew parcels were moving wrong," he admitted. "Not like this. Who in your town can read old land books and won't sell the fact that I asked?" Holloway thought. "Lena Mercer. Recorder's office. Not elected. Not rich. Too stubborn to leave. Trust her? As much as anybody still drawing breath." Lena Mercer worked in the county records annex, a low brick addition behind the courthouse. She was in her late 30s, dark hair tied back, gray sweater under a county badge lanyard, expression permanently arranged somewhere between exhaustion and defiance. Lena's caution was not cowardice. Silas understood that almost immediately. She had the look of someone who had spent years surviving in a building where truth could be altered by people with better titles and cleaner clothes. Her voice stayed level, but her eyes tracked exits the way Cody tracked doorways. When she spoke about vanished logs and moved pages, she sounded less surprised than tired. Black Hollow had trained that reaction into her. Not disbelief. Recognition. The county's corruption had not simply stolen land. It had reshaped the nervous systems of decent people, teaching them to whisper, document privately, and measure every sentence against the risk of being isolated afterward. That was why Holloway trusted her. Not because she was fearless, but because she remained honest under pressure. And in a county built on quiet handling, honesty had become a radical endurance instinct. When Holloway sent a note and Silas laid out the forged transfers, she did not feign surprise. "I knew pages were being replaced," she said quietly. I could never prove by whom because the access logs vanished whenever I flagged anything. She ran a finger down a copied deed. This notary stamp was retired 3 years before the filing date. Another page. This witness name appears in 2 probate packets and 1 mineral lease. Different handwriting every time. She looked up at Silas. Where did you get these? Jonah left them. Something flickered in her face. Grief, maybe guilt. Jonah came to me 6 months ago and asked where old ledger volume G14 had gone. I told him it had been sent to storage after water damage. That was a lie I had been told and repeated. I think he knew. What's in G14? Pre-digital chain of title entries for the ridge parcels before consolidation. The boring book nobody reads until somebody needs to prove who got cheated. Can you access it? Not through normal channels. Then not through normal channels. She held his gaze a moment longer, weighing risk against fatigue. Meet me tonight at 8. Back alley behind the records annex. The exchange changed the pace of the war. It was no longer Silas versus a feeling in the walls. It was evidence, a local ally, a compromised bureaucracy, and an opponent confident enough to step onto the property before applying pressure. On his way out, Cody stopped in the courthouse lobby and stared at a glass display case containing a county plat map. The northern ridge parcels were marked in faded ink, but a modern overlay had been added in red. Route study corridor. No public notice on the board. No explanation. Yet there it was, half hidden in plain sight. Someone had started normalizing the theft. That evening, Lena led Silas through the annex basement, using a borrowed key and a flashlight wrapped in red tape. "If this goes bad," she whispered, "I was never here." Understood. Cody padded ahead, quiet as shadow. In the storage room they found ledgers stacked by decade, moisture warped and dust filmed. G14 was not on the shelf where the index said it should be. Lena swore under her breath and began checking adjacent rows. Cody moved to a locked cage at the far wall and sat. The dog did not bark. He simply sat and stared at the padlock until both humans looked his way. "Your dog makes me feel inefficient," Lena muttered. Inside the cage were archive boxes marked Assessor Overflow, Flood Recovery. G14 lay beneath unrelated tax rolls, hidden, not lost. The ledger confirmed what Jonah suspected. Multiple parcels acquired by Hale-linked entities had never legally left the hands of their original owners. The county index had been altered later to imply abandonment, delinquency, or court-authorized transfer. Fraud layered atop obstruction. At the back of the ledger, tucked between pages, was a folded memo from a deceased judge requesting administrative quiet handling of disputed titles during an unspecified corridor development study. Quiet handling. The phrase felt like bloodless violence. Lena photographed every page while Silas stood overwatch and Cody watched the stairwell. Halfway through, footsteps sounded above them. Not random traffic. Slow, measured, descending. Lena killed the light. Silas moved to the side of the doorway, breath even, every muscle remembering old choreography. The basement door opened. A beam swept once across the hall. Then a voice, smooth and almost amused. "You can save yourselves the trespass report. I already know who's down there." Victor Hale. Silas had heard enough polished men in operations briefings to know the type. The ones who weaponized calm to make coercion sound rational. Hale did not come closer. He did not need to. "Mr. Redd," he called, "I had hoped grief would have made you more practical than Jonah." Cody's lips peeled back soundlessly. Hale continued. The county is changing. Change always looks cruel to people standing in front of it. I'm here to prevent you from being crushed by something larger than your sentiment. Silas stepped into the doorway where the other man could see him. Hale was perhaps late 40s, immaculate in dark wool and leather gloves, handsome in the expensive, bloodless way of men who outsource consequences. You forged titles, Silas said. You erased families. Hale tilted his head. I acquired neglected assets through processes your own institutions approved. By building fake owners and replacing records. That is an allegation. And Jonah died because of it? For the first time, the smile thinned. Jonah died because age and obsession make poor partners in winter. Silas took one step forward. Cody rose with him, perfectly aligned. Hale saw the dog and adjusted his distance by half a pace. Useful. You should leave the farm, Hale said softly. Take the inheritance. Sell to me. Make your peace with the dead in the normal American way by buying a cleaner house somewhere else. No. Hale exhaled like a disappointed tutor. Then you've mistaken courage for leverage. He backed away from the stairwell. Sheriff Holloway cannot protect you. Miss Mercer cannot outlive paperwork. And Black Hollow County has a long habit of believing the version of events that lets people keep sleeping. When the footsteps faded, Lena's hands were shaking. Silas took the ledger. Now he knows we have it. He knew before he came, she whispered. He came so we'd know he knew. Exactly. Pressure as theater. Silas secured the book under his coat and led them out through the alley into a night so cold it hurt his teeth. At the truck, Lena grabbed his sleeve. Don't go straight back to the farm. He'll expect that. Silas looked at Cody, who was already scanning the dark roofs beyond the courthouse. He expects a lot of things, Silas said. That's becoming a weakness. Silas used 3 back roads before returning to the farm and still found tire tracks waiting for him at the lane. Different from before. 2 vehicles this time, one heavy, one smaller. No attempt at concealment now. He killed the headlights short of the house and listened. Wind in the pines. Loose chain tapping barn siding. Cody rigid, nostrils flaring. Silas circled through the field rather than taking the porch. At the rear of the barn, he found the first sign of escalation. The service door jimmied, lock bent, but not broken through. Inside, things had been moved, not ransacked, touched. A survey tube open, feed sacks sliced, footprints around the workbench where Jonah's second cache had been hidden. Silas checked under the bench. Empty. He swore once low. Then Cody nudged the base of an old tack trunk. Inside, under bridles and a moldy blanket, lay the tube. Someone had found it, opened it, and either missed its importance or wanted Silas to know they had come within inches of it. Message received. In the house, nothing appeared stolen, but the upstairs office window stood cracked open to the cold. On the sill was another note, this one typed. Your dog can smell the trap. Can you? The line was meant to unsteady him. Instead, it clarified the rules. Hale's people wanted him reactive, sleep-deprived, and making fearful choices, so Silas chose work. By lantern light, he built a chain of custody packet using copies from the hidden room, the ledger images Lena had taken, and a written statement from Holloway regarding his rescue and the suspicious activity around the farm. He also recorded his own video testimony naming Hale, the record's irregularities, and the intimidation attempts. then uploaded fragments whenever the signal blipped alive. Not enough to complete transmission. Enough, perhaps, to create scattered digital witnesses. At dawn, Holloway called from the office landline. "Kersey's acting strange," the sheriff said without preamble. "Too interested in where I filed the incident report from my crash. Too interested in whether you're still at the farm." "He dirty?" "Maybe pressured. Maybe bought. Maybe just scared. Same result if the wrong door opens." Holloway coughed. "I found something else. Jonah made 2 complaints over the last year. Both vanished from the county system. Someone with internal access scrubbed them." "Who?" "Working on it." Before hanging up, Holloway said, "There's an old hearing chamber under the courthouse from back when flood claims were handled in person. No cameras. Disused. If Hale wants original documents without public record, that's where deals happen." The pieces were tightening. Silas spent the afternoon studying the maps and realized the contested parcels aligned with a buried aquifer corridor, not mere land grab. Water. In mountain counties, water rights could outvalue the soil itself by multiples once a private extraction project formed around them. Hale wasn't stealing rustic acreage. He was consolidating control over the ridge, the routes to it, and the signatures needed to legitimize a future pipeline or bottling contract. The scale explained the patience, the violence too. The more Silas studied Jonah's notes, the clearer the deeper design became. Water changed everything. Men would kill over timber, certainly, and they would cheat over grazing rights because greed rarely bothered with poetry. But water invited a colder class of ambition. Control the ridge. Control the access roads. Control the parcels above the aquifer. And you controlled the future bargaining position of every family left in the county. Suddenly, the forged titles were no longer isolated crimes. They were staging operations, administrative artillery. Quiet seizures designed to make the final announcement sound inevitable instead of constructed. That realization explained Jonah's fear better than anything else in the bunker. A land theft could still be argued parcel by parcel. A water corridor would reorder the whole valley. It would decide which homes kept value, which wells stayed private, which roads became leverage, and which holdouts could be buried under public interest language before they understood the trap. Silas had seen similar logic in war zones, where maps were never just maps, and every line on paper eventually became a pressure point on somebody's life. Black Hollow looked rural. The thinking behind the theft was strategic. By dusk, the house no longer felt inherited. It felt assigned. Cody understood that before Silas did, refusing to relax in the kitchen's warm light, as if waiting for the next move. Toward evening, Lena arrived at the farm in her own truck, pale with adrenaline. "My office terminal was accessed under my credentials while I was at lunch," she said. "Somebody wants it to look like I pulled restricted files alone." She laid a printed sheet on Jonah's table. It was an internal memo scheduling a confidential corridor review in the abandoned lower hearing room that same night. Attendees redacted, except for a facilities code tied to the judge's chambers and a private consultant badge range. "If they're meeting there," she said, "either they're panicking or finishing something." Holloway, reached by phone, wanted them to wait for warrants he almost certainly would not get. Silas looked at Cody, who had moved again to the front room bench and was staring not at the hidden wall this time, but at Jonah's old floor map spread open beside it. One parcel on the map carried a pencil X with 2 initials. D.H. Dean Holloway? No. Date annotation, perhaps. Silas traced the line outward. The X marked a survey marker on county land behind the courthouse retaining wall. Jonah's third evidence location had never been the house or barn. It had been a ground cache in town. "We're not going to the courthouse first," Silas said. "We're going behind it." They drove after dark without headlights for the last quarter-mile and parked in the alley behind the annex. Cody found the marker in under a minute, scraping through crusted snow to a capped pipe embedded in frozen ground. Inside was a vacuum-sealed packet containing audio tapes, notarized affidavits from 2 dead landowners, and a keycard stamped with an old county seal. Jonah had built redundancy like a man planning for his own murder. Using the card, Lena opened a maintenance door beneath the courthouse. The lower corridor smelled of mildew and boiler heat. Voices carried ahead. Silas moved them to the edge of the hearing chamber and listened. Hale was there, along with at least 3 others. One male voice he recognized as Deputy Kersey, another that sounded like Judge William Porter, and a 4th woman's voice he did not know. They were discussing amended filings, emergency condemnation procedures, and managing the farm issue before outside media caught scent. Then the judge said, almost bored, "Red is not the problem if the dog is removed and the sheriff is discredited." Cody's ears snapped forward. Silas's expression did not change. Inside, Hale replied, "The sheriff can be handled with an ethics complaint and medical leave. The veteran is more interesting. Men like him either explode or break. Ideally, he leaves convinced the county cannot be saved." "And if he doesn't?" the woman asked. Hale answered without hesitation, "Then the road remains dangerous in winter." That was enough. Silas raised his phone, capturing audio through the cracked door, then stepped back to withdraw before greed for more became stupidity. But Cody suddenly pivoted, body stiff toward the corridor behind them. Someone else in the tunnel. A maintenance worker? No, boots. Deliberate. Approaching from the exit. They were being boxed. "Move," Silas whispered. He sent Lena ahead with the cash while he and Cody created noise at the far end, knocking over a stack of folding chairs to draw the approaching man away from her. The tunnel erupted in shouting. A flashlight beam cut across concrete. Kersey's voice barked, "Stop!" Silas ducked through a service hatch Cody had already found ajar and emerged in the boiler room, then out into the freezing night through a coal chute door hanging off one hinge. By the time he reached the alley, Lena was at the truck, white-faced and shaking, but holding the packet tight. Gunshots did not follow. Hale's people were still operating beneath the threshold that would make the scandal impossible to contain. That was their weakness. Men built on paperwork hate loud mistakes. Back at the farm, Lena listened to the recording and sat down hard in Jonah's kitchen chair. "This is enough," she said. "Maybe not enough to convict everybody tomorrow, but enough to force daylight." Silas nodded. Cody finally lay down, though he kept his head on his paws and his eyes on the door. The county had moved from hidden pressure to actionable conspiracy. The next step would be overt. He could feel it with the same certainty he once felt an ambush before the first shot. Black Hollow Farm was no refuge now. It was a line in the snow, and by choosing not to leave, Silas had become the man standing on it. The overt move came before sunrise. Holloway called once, said only, "They've suspended my access," and the line went dead. 10 minutes later, the farm's power failed completely. Not weather, the storm had passed. Cody was already on his feet before the lights went out, ears forward, nostrils working. Silas saw motion through the east window, 3 shapes moving along the barn side, one cutting toward the back porch. He did not go for a gun because he did not have one. He went for position, light discipline, and movement. Barn route, he told Lena, who had stayed the night on Jonah's insistence echoing through common sense. She grabbed the evidence case. Silas opened the concealed wall panel, shoved the originals and the audio tapes below, then closed it. If the house fell, the room might still survive. The bells on the mudroom jangled hard. Someone forced the door. Cody launched not to bite but to intercept, striking the intruder at knee height with enough force to drive the man backward into the jam. Silas hit him second, using momentum and the door edge. The man wore dark winter gear without insignia and carried zip ties. Not law enforcement. Private contractors. The second man came through the kitchen window, and glass exploded across the floor. Cody wheeled, barking now, and the sound filled the house like a weapon. Silas used a cast-iron pan from the stove because it was there, and because the world does not honor neat categories when violence arrives at breakfast. The man went down. Lena ran for the back hall exactly as instructed. Outside, an engine revved. The third intruder had moved to cut off the barn. Silas grabbed the sheriff's emergency flare gun from the supply drawer and fired one red starburst into the dark above the field. Not to hit anyone. To tell the county sky a fight was happening. To make secrecy harder. He and Cody exited through the front rather than the rear, circling along the porch while the attackers regrouped inside, confused by the direction change. Snow squealed under boots. One contractor raised a baton. Cody feinted left, then checked hard right, buying Silas the half-second to slam the man into the porch rail. No killing, only disruption. No lingering. They reached the barn just as Lena got the truck moving. Good. Then headlights flared at the lane. Black SUV. Victor Hale stepped out beside it in dark gloves, no hurry in his posture, as if morning assaults were merely impolite administrative tasks. "This can still stop," he called over the wind. "You are protecting paper over people." "You're the one sending men into houses," Silas shouted back. Hale's face stayed almost pitying. "You still think this county belongs to the people who happen to age here. It belongs to the people you forged out of it." Hale nodded once to one of the contractors, who lunged toward the barn door. Cody intercepted with such speed, the man stumbled backward into the drift. Hale flinched despite himself. There it was again, his discomfort with anything that answered outside procedure. Silas took the opening and moved downhill along the fence, forcing Hale's line of sight to split. "Lena, go!" he yelled, and heard the truck fishtail free from the rear lot. One vehicle peeled away to follow her. Bad, but not worst. She had the duplicate packet and knew to drive straight to the state field office in Casper, where local hands would be thinner. That left Silas, Cody, Hale, and the men who had come to scare a veteran into leaving, but had failed to account for what happens when a man has already built his peace with dying once and would now rather stay. What Hale and his men did not understand was that intimidation works best on people who believe they still have a normal life to return to. Silas no longer measured risk that way. The farm, the hidden room, Jonah's evidence, and Cody's certainty had already stripped the choice down to a simpler shape. Leave, and Black Hollow would go back to sleep. Stay, and somebody would finally have to act in public. That was why the attack failed in its first objective. It did not surprise him into retreat. It clarified him. And clarity, in violent moments, is often the dangerous edge. The chase through the property unfolded in bursts. Contractor across the lower fence. Cody cutting angles. Silas using drifts, feed troughs and barn corners as cover. Hale never ran. He directed. That told Silas who mattered most to take alive in the court of public exposure. Not with fists, with evidence. He baited the pursuit toward the old survey line at the edge of Jonah's north field, where snow thinned over buried rock shelves and footing turned treacherous. Cody understood immediately, pressing one pursuer wide while Silas drove the other toward a gully masked by drift. The man dropped waist-deep with a curse. End of chase for him. The remaining contractor hesitated, baton low now, unsure whether the money covered broken bones in an unmarked field. Hale finally raised his voice. Enough! Everyone froze. Even the wind seemed to pause. Hale stepped forward until he and Silas faced each other across 10 yards of churned snow. You think exposure wins because you've heard me speak in a basement? You think a county that has already signed away itself will suddenly grow a spine because you wave paperwork at a camera? Silas stood with Cody at his knee, chest heaving, face cold and calm. No, he said. I think people change when the lie becomes too expensive to keep. Hale looked almost sad. That is why men like Jonah lose. They mistake moral clarity for infrastructure. He reached into his coat. Silas shifted. But Hale produced not a weapon, only a folded document in a plastic sleeve. Jonah signed an option agreement 2 weeks before he died, he said. Voluntary sale intent. Witnessed. Silas did not move. Forgery. Perhaps, but if I file it before your charming allegations land with anyone important, the public story becomes very simple. Elderly surveyor changes his mind. Estranged relative arrives after death. Invents conspiracy. Terrorizes county officials. Attacks contractors. And uses a trained dog to intimidate. You have military training and a dead man's obsession. We have process. Silas almost smiled then, because Hale had finally shown the shape of his fear. Not Cody, not fists, timing. He needed the paperwork to go first. He needed the story to harden before Lena reached outside authorities. Then you'd better hurry, Silas said. In the distance, faint but growing, came the sound of multiple engines climbing the ridge road. Not Hale's convoy. Too many sirens in the mix. Holloway, disabled but not done, must have pulled every favor left in his body. Hale heard it too. The pleasant mask slipped for the first time. He turned sharply toward the lane. The black SUV's driver shouted something urgent. One contractor bolted for the vehicle. Hale kept his composure for one admirable second more, then discarded it and moved. Silas did not chase him directly. He ran to the porch, tore down one of Jonah's old hurricane lanterns, lit the rag in it with the kitchen stove, and thrust it high from the porch rail beside the dying flare stain in the snow. Smoke, light, visibility, witness. When the first responding units arrived, county deputies from neighboring jurisdiction, a state patrol car Holloway must have convinced to move, and 2 volunteer fire trucks, because chaos always summons the truly useful people. There was no more hiding that Black Hollow Farm had become an incident. Hale's SUV made the lane but not the main road. State Patrol intercepted it at the Cedar Split. One contractor was treated for a knee injury. Another tried to identify himself as private security and failed when nobody could produce a contract. Holloway arrived last, pale as old paper, and furious enough to stand on spite alone. He looked at the broken door, the blood on Silas's sleeve, Cody's braced stance, and the tire ruts in the yard. Good, he said to the watching deputies. Now maybe the paperwork people will finally have to explain themselves in daylight. By noon, Lena called from Casper. She had reached a state investigator, transferred the files, and uploaded the hearing room audio, the ledger images, Jonah's letters, and Silas's testimony from a federal building Wi-Fi network nobody in Black Hollow could scrub fast enough. The county's lie was not dead yet, but it was bleeding publicly. Silas stood on the porch after the call ended. Looking over the field, Jonah had refused to surrender. Cody leaned against his leg for the first time since they had come to the farm. Not because the threat was gone, because the dog knew something essential had changed. They were no longer only defending a house. They were holding ground long enough for the truth to arrive. Public truth moved slower than blizzards and less honestly, but once it crossed a ridge, it was harder to turn back. Within 48 hours, Black Hollow County was full of outside plates, state investigators, a regional paper, and 2 satellite trucks from Casper. Judge Porter took medical leave. Deputy Kersey retained counsel. The county recorder's office closed for system review. Victor Hale posted a statement describing himself as the target of malicious allegations by unstable individuals exploiting a family death. It might have worked for another week if Jonah Redd had been less thorough. He had not only documented fraudulent transfers, he had indexed motive. The water corridor maps, the private meeting audio, the altered ledger, and the chain of shell entities all pointed to the same scheme. Acquire the ridge through paper deceit, secure the aquifer rights beneath it, then announce a development project after local resistance had been legally hollowed out. People who had stayed quiet because they thought their own little parcel was safe suddenly understood the design. Quiet broke. What surprised Silas most in those hours after the hearing was not Hale's fall, but the speed with which ordinary people reclaimed their own voices once the first fear broke. The county had not been empty of courage. It had been waiting for permission, evidence, and timing to align. That shift mattered. Laws would take months. Restored titles would take longer. But the silence that made the theft possible had already been damaged beyond repair. For Black Hollow, that was the first honest morning in years, and everyone in town felt it. June Bell from the hardware store gave a sworn statement that Hale's representatives had pressured elderly owners to sign maintenance access forms that were actually easement concessions. A widower named Tom Vesey produced mailed notices for taxes he had already paid. An old woman from the church brought a box of letters Jonah had written urging her to keep every envelope from the county. Piece by piece, the lie lost its elegance. Silas, for his part, hated cameras and spoke to them anyway. He did not dramatize. He described the crash rescue, the hidden room, the documents, the intimidation, the basement recording, the attack at the farm. Holloway stood beside him when he spoke, ribs taped, one eye still bruised. Cody sat at heel, gaze forward, body still as carved wood. The image traveled farther than Silas expected, because audiences understand instantly what a calm dog beside a calm man means. Preparation, not panic. Yet the final confrontation did not happen on television. It happened in the old courthouse assembly hall during an emergency county session convened under state oversight. Hale arrived in a navy coat with attorneys at each elbow and composure restored. Men like him recover their faces quickly. The room was packed. Residents, press, investigators, church ladies, ranch hands, clerks, and the families whose names had been treated like movable fencing. Silas had no intention of grandstanding. He only intended to close every remaining exit. Lena testified first, walking the investigators through the ledger chain and the metadata anomalies in the county system. A state analyst showed how access logs had been manually deleted under administrator credentials linked to a retired account resurrected through a maintenance backdoor. Holloway described Jonah's earlier complaints disappearing and the pressure campaign that followed. Then Silas played the hearing room audio. There is a particular kind of silence that falls when people hear, in plain language, the machinery that has been operating behind their backs. Not shock, exactly. Recognition given permission. Hale's attorney objected to chain of custody. The state investigator responded by introducing the pipe cache, the barn duplicates, and the wall room originals, each corroborating the others. One by one, the strategic denials failed. Hale himself asked to speak. Of course he did. Men like him always believe the room is theirs once they are standing. He framed the project as inevitable modernization, the paperwork issues as technical disputes, the deaths as unfortunate, unrelated tragedies, inflated by grief and anti-development sentiment. He even turned toward Silas and said, with polished restraint, "Mr. Redd is a decorated veteran carrying visible trauma. We should be careful not to build public policy around a private breakdown." It might have landed if Cody had not risen at exactly that moment. Not aggressive, simply alert, staring fixedly at Hale's left hand. The hand still holding a gold lighter engraved with Hale Resource Holdings. Silas remembered the burned smell on the widow's cabin photos in Jonah's files. Remembered Jonah's note about the house and barn. Remembered a county fire report mentioning a witness who saw an expensive car near the road on the night of the fire but could not identify it. The lighter meant nothing alone. But Hale's reflexive concealment of it, when the dog noticed, created a ripple across the room. Tiny things matter when a story is collapsing. The state fire investigator requested the object on record. Hale refused. The room's mood changed. Outside, snow began again, soft and steady against the tall windows, as though the county insisted on staging itself with weather. The real end came from a witness nobody expected. Martha Vesey, 81, bent nearly double but still too proud to sit while speaking. She took the microphone and held up the option agreement Hale had tried to use against Jonah. "This signature ain't Jonah's," she said, "because I watched Jonah practice his J every Christmas on my stupid cookies, and that flourish right there is Victor Hale's clerk trying to imitate a man who wrote like he was cutting fence wire." The room laughed, then hushed. She continued, "And because Jonah showed me the blank form they wanted him to sign and told me if he ever signed anything that neat, I'd know he'd been murdered first." It was not forensic testimony. It was better. It was local truth, plain-spoken and unafraid. Others followed. Too many for procedure to comfortably absorb. The county commissioners, sensing the tide, voted to suspend all pending corridor filings and cooperate fully with state review. Hale stood, finally stripped of his cultivated patience, and walked toward the exit with his attorneys. State investigators intercepted him at the aisle. Not a dramatic tackle, just paperwork meeting flesh at last. He was not yet convicted of everything Jonah had named, but he was no longer moving freely through Black Hollow as if the place had already been priced and purchased. After the session, townspeople spilled into the snowfall and spoke to one another in clumps that looked like the early rebuilding of civic nerve. June Bell hugged Lena. Holloway sat down on the courthouse steps because his ribs finally overruled pride. Reporters tried to corner Silas. He ignored them all until one young woman asked, "Why didn't you leave when it got dangerous?" That answer, at least, he had. Because the house wasn't hiding from me, he said. It was waiting for somebody to listen. He drove back to the farm after dark with Cody beside him and the county behind them, still damaged, but no longer asleep. The hidden room remained under the front wall, quiet and intact. The bench still faced the window. The floor still knew what it had held. Silas stood in the center of the room Jonah had left him and understood, finally, that inheritance is not property. It is unfinished duty. Jonah had not summoned him there to drown in old guilt. He had called him there because some men die before they can force the truth through the final locked door, and sometimes the only people left to finish the job are those already intimate with ruin. Cody lay down by the bench, at peace for the first time since they arrived. Outside, the snow covered the tire ruts, the footprints, the drag marks, and the broken lines in the yard. It did not erase them. It only marked the place where they had been. By spring, state charges would widen. Parcels would be restored. Families would spend years untangling what greed had done in months. Holloway would keep his badge. Lena would run for recorder and win. The ridge would remain under local protection until every title was audited. Silas would repair the barn, not because he planned to settle forever, but because leaving things stronger than he found them felt like the closest thing to prayer he knew how to perform. On his first clear morning alone after the hearings, he took coffee to the porch and watched dawn come over Black Hollow County. Cody sat at his side, looking the same direction. The farm no longer felt like a trap. It felt like witness. And for the first time in years, Silas did not wake wanting to outdrive memory. He woke knowing that sometimes the dead do not ask us to follow them backward. Sometimes they leave us a road forward and trust a good dog to make sure we see it. Sometimes God does not send thunder. Sometimes he sends a warning in the quiet, a faithful dog at the right door, a stubborn truth that refuses to stay buried, or the strength to stand one more day when leaving would be easier. In everyday life, many people face smaller versions of the same choice. Stay silent for comfort, or speak for what is right. If this story moved you, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to K9 and Seal Stories. May God bless every person watching tonight. Protect every home that feels under pressure, and remind every weary heart that grace can arrive in ways the world almost overlooks.